If you get the first goal in a Brawl Ball match, you're probably feeling pretty good and you want to go straight for that second goal. But a lot of times what you'll see pros do, and what technically is the better strategy in a lot of cases, is to just hide the ball from your opponents and wait for time to run out. So let's go over how you can do that really well. So this is a strategy that you only want to adopt when you're up 1-0 in any Brawl Ball game, because if you want to run the timeout, then you obviously want to win when the time does end up running out, so you have to be up a goal. And the best place to hide the ball is always going to be on your side in the corner, because that's going to maximize the distance that your opponents have to travel if they end up getting a team wipe on you and actually getting the chance to score on you. And the more distance they have to travel, the slower they're going to go, so the more likely they are to not be able to kick the ball into your goal in time before you respawn. And if they don't go after the ball, well, then you just win when the time runs out. So this is a really good tactic, but how good it is actually depends on what map you're on, because there are different wall structures that will make it easier or harder to hide the ball. So there are a few maps that you want to take note of. First is Sneaky Fields. There are walls completely blocking off the corner here, so if you hide your ball in this area, it's going to force your opponent to travel about 10 tiles more than they normally would if they were just taking a straight path to the goal. Now I'm just going to assume that all these brawlers are traveling at a normal movement speed 2.4 tiles per second, so that means it's going to take them 4.2 more seconds to score the ball than they normally would if you didn't hide the ball in this spot. That's a pretty significant difference, and I'll talk about how significant that is a bit later on. Another map that has walls like these near the corner is Penalty Kick. It's not currently in rotation, but when it does come back in rotation, you can actually force your opponents to travel 19 tiles in order to pick up a ball that you have stashed in the corner, because there are a lot of walls they have to go through. Now, if they have a wall breaker on their team, it becomes a lot easier for them to get to the ball, because they can just break through the walls near the bottom, and then the map sort of just becomes like any other normal map. But if they don't have any wall breakers, then you're going to force them to waste 7.9 seconds trying to pick your ball up out of the corner if you hide it there. The two other maps that are special are Super Stadium and Triple Dribble, where they each have this tiny 2x2 block of walls near the corner that's going to make your opponents take just a bit longer if they want to get the ball out of that area. I estimated it'll take about an extra 10 tiles for them to get to the ball and get back to where their normal path would be, straight towards the goal, and so that'll take them an extra 4.2 seconds, just like it did in Sneaky Fields. Now, for every other map, you can still hide the ball in the corner even though there are no walls protecting it, and it'll still force them to go out of their way a bit, because it's not a straight path to the goal. They have to go all the way into the corner and then come all the way out of the corner still. So in those cases, it'll stall them out by an extra 6 to 8 tiles depending on how many walls there are around the goal, because the more walls there are around the goal, the farther they need to come back out of the corner in order to be at an angle where they can actually kick the ball into the goal. So those 6 to 8 tiles means they'll be stalled about 2.5 to 3.3 seconds on any normal map if you just kick the ball into the corner. Now, something to note about these times is that if there are multiple opponents still alive when they're trying to score the ball in this time, then they can just pass the ball to each other, which is going to save a lot of time because they're not going to have to walk the ball to the goal. They can just kick it there. And for every pass, it takes about 40% less time than if they were just to walk the ball that distance. And it varies depending on how good they're passing to each other, but generally speaking, on average, I think it'll be about 40% less time that it takes for every pass that they do. So with that being said, how good of a strategy is this, and should you use this on maps even if there aren't any walls defending the corner? Now, if we take a look at the time your opponents actually have to score whenever they completely team wipe you, it takes exactly 8.5 seconds from the moment you die until you respawn and basically get to where your goal line is. So you're in a position where you can defend. It takes 8.5 seconds to do that. So basically what they have to do here is, from the first person they kill, they have to kill the rest of the team and get the ball to the goal in 8.5 seconds. And so if we can reduce that 8.5 seconds as much as possible, it gives you a much greater chance that your opponents won't be able to make the goal in time. And so for maps like Penalty Kick, where you can stall them 7.9 seconds, that literally gives them a 0.6 second window from the time they make their first kill to get the ball into the goal, excluding the time that it takes them to actually get the ball. So that's basically impossible in that situation unless they're passing between all three of them and they do it really efficiently. And in other maps where you're subtracting 4.2 seconds off, then they only have just over 4 seconds to do all of this stuff. So you can see how significant of an advantage you get from actually hiding the ball here, because it lops off a massive chunk of that 8.5 second window they have to actually score. Now, on maps that don't block off the corner, it only takes about 2.5 to 3.3 seconds to get the ball out of the corner, like I said before. So in those cases, it is still going to be pretty easy for your opponents to make the goal if they team wipe you, but it is going to be harder than if you just didn't do anything with the ball and they just had it right in front of them after they team wiped you. So you're always going to get some sort of value if you can kick the ball into the corner, as long as you're up 1-0. It doesn't really matter how much time is left in the game, because if they want to score, if the ball's in the corner, they're going to have to team wipe you anyway. And so if they did that when you didn't put the ball in the corner, they still would have scored. So it doesn't really put you at much of a disadvantage by putting this ball in the corner. So theoretically, theoretically, this is always a good idea, unless there's a better way to stall out time. And the only other option that I could think of is to just kick the ball past the opponents. And so that's going to force one of them to walk backwards to pick up the ball, and then walk forwards back to where they were before you kick the ball behind them. So this would have to save 3.3 seconds or more in order for it to be worth it and for it to stall more time than you would by just kicking the ball into the corner. So that means you would need to force the person who's picking up the ball to walk an extra 7.92 tiles, if we're just assuming they have a 2.4 tile per second movement speed. So you would have to kick it 4 tiles or more behind them, so they have to go back 4 tiles and then come back another 4 tiles for a total of 8, which is more than the 7.92. And this is perfectly possible to do with a normal kick as long as you're within 4 tiles of your opponent. Now, you probably won't be that close to your opponent unless you're a melee or a short range brawler, but if you are, then this is a perfectly viable strategy, and it's going to stall more time from your opponents than if you were to kick the ball into corner on a normal map. Now, if you're not one of those brawlers, then you would have to super kick in order to get the ball far enough behind your opponents to stall them out for long enough to make it worth it. And it's usually pretty worth it to use your super for this, because if you don't use your super for it, then they're just guaranteed to score essentially. So it's worth using your super in this case unless you're pretty sure they can get the goal either way, even if you stall them out a while. But those are the two situations in which you would want to kick the ball past the opponents, because that's going to stall them longer than if you were to kick the ball in the corner. But on those specific maps that I mentioned, Sneaky Field, Penalty Kick, and Super Stadium and Triple Dribble, almost all the time you're not going to be able to get it far enough behind them to make it more worth it than just kicking the ball in the corner. And on top of that, when you kick the ball behind them, you usually want to do that right before you die, right before they get the team wipe, because that's when you want to stall them out. So you have to time it really perfectly. But when you're just kicking the ball into the corner, you can do that at any point when you're alive. So it's a lot more consistent to kick the ball in the corner as well. So that is something you have to think about. The kicking the ball in the corner is a bit more consistent than trying to kick the ball just past your opponents right before you die. But if you do see the opportunity, then doing that could be optimal. Now, once you have the ball in the corner, you don't actually have to just leave it at that. If you're playing specific brawlers, you can defend this ball very, very well. On maps like Sneaky Field and Penalty Kick, it's such a small, narrow space that the opponents have to get into in order to get the ball out that it's really easy to kill them while they're doing it. If you're running a brawler like Sprout, you don't even need to kill them and deal a lot of damage. You can just put your wall right in front of the ball, and that buys you a free 10 seconds where they literally just can't get to the ball, unless they have a wall breaker, of course. Now, I don't know why you would, but if you're running the transplant gadget, then you can do this a bunch of times and even stall up to 40 seconds out of the game just by throwing your walls over and over in front of the ball. A similar thing you can do is with Bo's super. You can just sort of throw it directly in front of the ball, and your opponents are going to struggle a lot to get to the ball without taking a lot of damage, because if they don't want to take damage, they're going to have to trip the mines normally, and that takes a ton of time. So you're going to buy a lot of time if you throw Bo's mines there. Now, that doesn't mean you should just run Bo in Brawl Ball because he's good for this strategy, but if you are pushing your Bo and this Brawl Ball map happens to be out, then it is a pretty good strategy you can adopt. But it certainly doesn't make Bo good in Brawl Ball because of this. Now, with this stalling tactic beside, there is one more stalling tactic that you can do in Brawl Ball completely unrelated to hiding the ball. And this is stalling for time right when you're about to get a goal. This after you've completely team wiped your opponents and the score is 0-0. So you're about to go up 1-0. You're standing right in front of the goal, no opponents to defend you, and what you want to do here is literally just wait. You never want to kick the ball in immediately if you see this open goal. You want to wait until the last possible second, because it's really just free time that you're wasting here, because in order for your opponents to win the game, they have to get at least one goal. And so if you can soak up as much time from the timer as possible by just waiting there, then that's going to give less time to your opponents to make that goal. So you want to wait until someone from your opponent's team respawns before you kick the ball into the goal. Now, of course, if you end up screwing this up and they do kill you by like quickly spamming a super right when they respawn before you kick the ball, then you've probably just thrown the game. So you want to be very careful with this and just make sure that you're doing it with 100% consistency. What I like to do is kick the ball in right as their shield is growing, but right before the player actually physically respawns, so that way there's absolutely no chance they can even press any attack buttons to stop me from making the goal. Now, how much time does this actually save you? Well, it takes about 7.1 seconds from the time that you kill someone until the time that they actually respawn and are able to use attacks again. So you can stall up to 7.1 seconds with this strategy. It's probably going to be a lot less because when you have to team wipe your opponents, the first one who respawns is going to be a threat to you. So you'll only have 7.1 seconds from the first person you kill, and you're probably not going to have the ball right in front of the goal immediately after you kill a single one of your opponents. But you can stall multiple seconds by doing this, and I know there have been a ton of games that have come down to a matter of seconds, and so stalling this out at no cost to you is a very, very good strategy because it can just win you some games by not giving your opponents enough time. Now, although most of the time you'll be doing this once when the score is 0-0. You can actually also do this if you're down a goal and it's 0-1 and you think that your team is better in overtime. Usually you do this if your team is all long-range brawlers and your opponents are pretty close range, like they're running Poco Double Tank or something, because then you have a significant advantage in overtime because you completely outrange them and there are no walls for them to hide behind. So if you stall the timer out when you know that it's going to be a tie game 1-1 after you make the next goal, then you just make it that much closer to overtime where your team's going to have an advantage. So you definitely want to stall the timeout in that situation. So I definitely recommend using all these strategies. Stalling for time may not be the most exciting for those few seconds where it happens, but if you're looking to push very high trophies, these strategies are just going to win you those extra few games that you need to boost your win rate up.